If you want to be more effective in your work and in your life, and you'd like to have more confidence that you're meeting your intentions, this is where it begins. Welcome to Do Busy Right, helping you organize your information and manage your attention so that they work for you, not against you. We educate you and encourage you by discussing ways to be more effective, not more exhausted. Let's do busy right. Hi there. So today I want to talk about this notion of being your own executive. And we're going to talk about mastering your productivity through the idea of executive function. So, okay, Larry, what does all that mean? Let me tell you. So my goal here today is to help you understand a few things that are true about our knowledge work that we do. And specifically, we're going to unpack a concept called executive function. Now, I've recently run across this term in its kind of fullness. It might be new to you, but I believe it perfectly describes what we're all dealing with in our daily lives and our daily work. So ultimately, I want us to be thinking about what I'll call an operating system that we can put in place to help us with this crucial thing that is executive function. So, why should you listen to this podcast? Why should you give an hour of your valuable attention? Because understanding and improving your executive function, in my opinion, is the root of your productivity in the modern world as a knowledge worker. Your executive function is about your ability to plan, to manage time and attention, problem solve, to implement tasks in the world. These essential skills that put you in a position to operate effectively in the world. This is true whether we're talking about work skills or your personal life. And of course, those of you that know me know I don't separate those two. But when we think about this executive function, we can think about it as the underlying athleticism for knowledge work and workers in the 21st century economy. So also, there's this thing that research just showed, and there's this thing called productivity anxiety. And strengthening our executive function is the cure for productivity anxiety. I'm all about human flourishing. I want everybody that knows me or listens to me to flourish more in their lives as human beings. And I think there are several ways to do that. But one of the more important is to deal with this notion of productivity anxiety. I think it really harms our ability to flourish because we're concerned and we're worried all the time. We have stress. Okay. So this research study shows that while 61% of us feel like we're productive, 80% of us report having productivity anxiety. Now let that sink in for just a second because those two numbers don't match. If 60% of us feel productive, then 40% of us should feel productivity anxiety. But 80% of us feel productivity anxiety. And so that anxiety and that stress, I think, interferes with our flourishing. And the way to attack that anxiety is by each of us focusing on sharpening and improving our executive function. And I'll explain what all this means, but we can address this 80% challenge. We can really begin to address it. So I talk to people a lot about how to get better at productivity. This executive function is a fairly new term that I'm going to introduce to try and help us understand more clearly, but I'm a productivity coach. So if you're interested in understanding this productivity anxiety and you're interested in how to work on that, I can help. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm Larry at dobusyright.com, or you can hit me on LinkedIn. I'm not hard to find on LinkedIn, and let's have a relationship and let's figure out if there's something I can do to help you get better at your executive function, at your productivity, so you can lower your productivity anxiety and flourish more as a human being in the modern economy. So let's talk about executive function. So what is it? So at its core, it's a term used by psychiatrists and psychologists. It's a very technical term. Okay. And they use it often in discussions of behavioral traits or conditions like ADD, ADHD, mostly because ADD and ADHD kind of tend to, I'll say, interact with our executive function. So we'll think of it as a productivity measure, okay? And I'll explain this as the core of what we call productivity. So we're not going to talk about clinical diagnoses or anything like that on this podcast, okay? Executive function encompasses our native mental abilities, our core mental abilities around being able to plan, being able to execute a sequence of steps with a goal in mind, being able to manage attention or time, right? Which most people say. I say manage attention, to problem solve, okay? To switch from one set of conceptual mental skills to another. That's executive function. We'll talk about it at some detail. So when I say athleticism, okay, then I'm talking about executive function, this work athleticism, right? So executive function is really this basic set of skills that allows and enables the more specific set of knowledge worker skills that you may have as an attorney or a doctor or an engineer, right? Those are specific trainings for specific kinds of mental models that we put on in order to easily solve a certain class of problems. But we all have this executive function piece. Some of us just apply it to being a lawyer, while others of us apply it to being a doctor. I apply it to being a coach and a researcher and thinker. So that's that underlying piece. Just like if you've got athleticism, you may use your physical skills to apply to basketball, specific training, or tennis, or a different sport. Okay, so it's that underlying skill set, executive function. So when we look at our knowledge work, productivity is, I'm going to define productivity, and particularly productivity improvement, as the maintenance and improvement of our executive function skills. That's what we talk about when we talk about productivity. Okay, because executive function is this life skill, and it's a core human thing that we do. And I'll explain what I mean by that. But it's a life skill. So, for example, decide how much time you're going to spend watching Netflix. Okay. That's as much an executive function thing, right, as doing a piece of work for money. Okay. Now, again, it differs from this specialized skill set. And we're talking about, an electrical engineer has advanced math that they've learned that applies to a particular class of problems that they create value by solving a class of problems. Lawyers' deep understanding of law and precedent and argument, okay, that they then apply in particular circumstances to create value in the world. Okay, on and on it goes. But these techniques, that's a little bit different from the executive function. And we'll use a metaphor and I'll explain what I mean there. But executive function focuses on this general effectiveness out in the world. Okay. Core athletic skills are like hand-eye coordination and good balance and these kinds of things. Well, executive function has a set of things, right? Being able to manage your attention, being able to be on time. So these kinds of ideas. Now, there's a really interesting, quick aside that I'm going to take. So there's a notion also of group executive function. And I'm going to explain this very briefly just to help illuminate this concept of executive function. Okay. So Group executive function then refers to how teams operate, how groups operate, and that includes rules, standard operating procedures for things like meetings and communication. How do you manage information? How do you communicate? What tools do you use? Some teams use Slack to communicate, other teams don't. Okay. And so that choice of tool is part of this notion of group executive function. Now, this talk is going to focus on personal executive function. But it's important to note that group executive function is dependent on the collective individual executive function of the group members. Okay. So if you want to be a good member of a functioning group, then you probably need to be on top of your own executive function game, right? Otherwise, you're always late for the meeting. You've never brought what you want to bring, and you can't communicate terribly well what your ideas are, okay? Which doesn't make you a great team member in the knowledge work world. I know that's not you, right? Which is why I'm chuckling a little bit. So back to this notion of executive function. And I'm going to try to explain this because it's not the simplest concept to grasp. In the information age, we have delegated a significant portion of our executive function to our computing machinery. Okay, especially things like information storage and information search, along with a lot of math we've offloaded to the machine. Math, information storage, information search, all these kinds of ideas that are executive function have moved out, right? Support for our communication. AI, we're moving even more executive function into the machine. So now AI is helping us with clear communication. So that helps us, I think, understand what this executive function is. So in most ways, computers are now tools that support our executive function. 75 years ago, computers were tools that computed, and they computed in specific ways based on how they were configured physically. And they computed, they did math. Now, fast forward 70 years, computers do everything. But they're supporting our executive function. So back from the very earliest days, they supported our executive function because we offloaded our math to them, a particularly tedious math. And now we have their capabilities, the computer capabilities have expanded. And so now we've continued to outsource our executive function ideas to them. For example, our sense of time management. Most of us have a calendar, and most of our calendars are on the computer. And we use the functions of the computer to help us deal with the calendar more effectively. Okay, fair enough. Good. So the reason I bring up that parallel is one of the fundamental things that a computer has is an operating system. And so I want us to use that analogy to help us understand what our executive function is. So I'm going to say that our executive function is very much like the operating system in a computer. Okay. So if you understand what the operating system in your computer does, it allows the computer to be a multi-purpose machine. The operating system allows it to be a multi-purpose machine. So the operating system is what tells the computer it's a computer. It's what tells the computer what a hard drive is, how to use memory, basically how to be a computer. And then the software packages that we add to that are more like the specific functions we perform in the world. So the operating system sits there and tells the computer to be a computer, and then we say, hey, computer, I want you to do some math, load up a spreadsheet for me. And the operating system says, okie doke, and loads up a spreadsheet. Now the computer has a specific set of, I'm going to say skills, that it didn't have before it loaded up that program. Okay. And what allows the computer to load up the program, the Excel program, is the operating system. So much like the operating system allows the computer to be a multi-purpose device, our executive function allows us to address different kinds of roles, different kinds of circumstances in our lives. Okay. Whether we're balancing a checkbook and then we're behaving like an accountant to some degree, solving a household problem, we're loading up the handyman program and behaving in these ways. And I'll describe a little bit more thoroughly what I mean by that. Improving our relationships. We load up our relationship brain, a set of skills and a set of patterns of thought that we load up so that we can approach this task with more skill. Okay. So the operating system, the executive function, is really fundamental to being good at work. And of course, you know the definition of work that we use here, which is everything we do to turn ourselves and our environment into what we want them to be. So the executive function then is the bridge between our ability to look at our environment and go, hey, I wish X were true in that environment, to link that with some tasks and activities in the world by which we move our environment closer to our mental image of it. And so when we look at this, this is really a fundamental core component of being human, because our ability to act in the world, our agency, our ability to turn ourselves and our environment into what we want it to be is such a core human skill. It extends out to relationships, right? I want to turn my relationship with my wife into a better relationship as defined by a mental image that I have of a good relationship. Sometimes I want to make money. Sometimes I want to have money in my bank account. So I put on a certain program, if you will, a certain set of skills, maybe as a writer. Okay. So I start behaving as a writer in order to produce value in such a way that people can pay me for it directly. Now, that's a very different set of skills and tactics than relationship Larry. Now, it doesn't mean that they're completely dissimilar, because communication is important in both, for example. Okay. But I'm not being writer Larry, I'm being husband Larry, right? Or father Larry, or buddy Larry. And I'm loading up these programs and these mental models and these behavioral things, tactics that I know to do. Okay. So when we talk about improving this executive function, right? So how do we go about doing it? Well, I think we look to the past for finding our methodology for improving it. And I'm looking to Frederick Taylor and scientific management. So you may know that Frederick Taylor, around the 1900s, so 120 years ago or so, really began to investigate the efficiency and effectiveness of manual work in factory settings. And he wanted to help people be more productive so that they could produce more valuable output and thus capture more value for themselves and be more effective in the work. Fair enough. Okay. He gets a little bit of a bad rap, but that was what scientific management was about. And I've talked about this in other podcasts. So he was the first one to really sit down and try and break down these physical roles into some components so that he could study each component better and try to optimize components as a way of optimizing the overall system. A very scientific, a very analytical approach. And it was wildly successful. Okay. Peter Drucker will tell you that the economic prosperity that we see in the West over the last 100 years has primarily been driven by increases in manual labor productivity. And his concern for the 21st century, he's dead now, his concern for the 21st century was, can we continue to improve the productivity of our workforce now that our workforce is shifting over into knowledge worker productivity? So this is pretty important stuff. So we're going to use that scientific management approach to take a look at this executive function piece. And I will give you a hypothesis. My hypothesis and my model is that increased productivity in knowledge work is almost definitely due to higher executive function, greater executive function as the underlying cause. Okay. Well, you say, hey, Larry, being a lawyer is the way to, increase your productivity. Well, we'll talk about that. Okay. And that's absolutely correct. And let's flip that 90 degrees and we'll take a look at it from a different angle here in just a second. So when we look at executive function skills, some of the things that I've broken it out into, and we're going to try to improve components. So one component is planning. And by planning, I don't necessarily mean project management, although it could be. I mean, planning is being able to imagine a sequence of steps to achieve a goal. And humans by nature are reasonably good at this, but I think we'll break it down and we'll see if we can get better at planning. Okay. Attention management. Some people would say time management. I don't like the notion of time management. It's attention management. So that's our ability to maintain focus and presence and to put our mental spotlight onto a particular context so that we can apply our mental energies to it. Problem solving. How do we solve problems? Can we get better, faster at problem solving? Okay. By problem solving, I mean, well, I can see the first 3 steps between me and my goal. What's the 4th? I don't know it yet. So when I get there, I'm going to have to solve a problem. Okay. And make my world better. Information management. How do I find the information that I need? How do I store information? How do I gain knowledge? Information management is a core component of executive function. Relationship building. So I want to have strong relationships with people in the world because then they understand and trust me, particularly within my family, but also my friend group, my church group, all of you all that listen to me. I want to have a strong relationship. What does that mean? Well, that means a lot of things. It means that I need to have some empathy for where you are in the world, among many other things. But that's a skill that's part of this executive function, I would say, as a core human skill. And then there's a whole list of, as we are so focused on work, there's a whole list of basic workplace competencies, right? Being on time, effective communication in a business world, business level math skills, understanding situational appropriateness, culture and modes of communication and dress and presentation, these kinds of ideas. So all of these things are executive function ideas. Now, why is this so important? Now, and I talked about this notion of productivity anxiety, and we talked about it earlier. A significant disparity exists in the world. 61% of people feel productive. That means 40% of people don't really feel productive. But 80% of people experience productivity anxiety. So twice as many people are worried about their productivity as people that feel like they're not terribly productive. So what on earth is going on? Okay. And this discrepancy brings this core issue out, and it's a modern issue for human beings, right? I would say our feeling of productivity often stems from our own standards. And some other things that I'll get into. While the anxiety possibly arises from feeling like we're failing to meet others' expectation or from other kinds of unfavorable self-comparison to others that leads to this thought of, well, I'm not productive enough. We look around the world and we go, wow, it looks like that person's a lot more productive than I am. I'm anxious about it. Okay. Now, there is an effect in here, and it's this notion of this bravado thing that humans tend to do that we call self-confidence. And it's like, oh, I'm pretty productive. So that's in there and that's true. But this productivity anxiety really begs the question of how well are we actually doing? Are we flourishing? So I think if we have productivity anxiety, that diminishes our flourishing, restricts our flourishing because we've got this stress and anxiety all the time. So symptoms of productivity anxiety include feeling your productivity is inadequate or not meeting expectations. Okay, that's a simple one. Guilt when you're not working, or guilt about your output when you are working. Oh, I can't take time off because I'll fall behind and the boss won't like it and I'll get fired. I need to work the weekend because the customers expect it. Okay. So being able to set that aside when we choose to is part of this productivity anxiety. Guilt and shame associated with taking vacation or sick days. Oh, you took a sick day, you're a slacker. Okay. Negative comparison to others is part of this challenge that we face. We look around, as I said before, we look around and we go, ooh, I might not be as productive as person X over there. And then another is a chronic state of dissatisfaction and a feeling of helplessness about that dissatisfaction with our output, our ability to create value in the world, our ability to make meaningful things happen in the world. And I think we're challenged there. Now, there is a positive sense of self-dissatisfaction, which is what drives us to get better. And that's a positive sense, if you will. But I'm talking about this negative sense, this overriding concern about, well, my productivity is not what it needs to be. I'm not creating enough value, and blah, blah, blah. And that stress that's associated with that. So when we look at, these core issues in the executive function world, it really has a lot to do with our attention. Okay. And here's why productivity anxiety is the challenge. Okay. If you stop and think about what anxiety is, when we're anxious, I always associate that with worry. Okay. And worry is this mental state of negative self-talk, a poorly executed search for solutions to the problem. By poorly executed, I mean, we're not really sitting down and thinking about how to solve it. We're just worrying about it. Okay. We're just grumbling and fussing about it. And our mind turns over and over and over with this notion of worry as compared to actually pulling out a problem and trying to solve it. And it's a little bit of a fine distinction there, but I think, most people would know the difference that I'm talking about here when we're worrying about something. Well, when we're worrying about something, think for just a second, what resource are we consuming to produce worry? Well, we're using our mental resources. We're actually using our executive function in order to worry about our executive function. So it's recursive. The challenge is recursive. the very thing that challenges our productivity is the thing that's continuing to eat up our productivity. So how can we resolve that in a way that's going to make us less anxious? Now, when we talk about executive function and anxiety, certainly we've covered that, but executive function is all about attention. So I said our executive function is the bridge between what we imagine, this imagined, if you will, or planned, perhaps, anticipated state of a chunk of the world, you know, and our ability to engage in effort to bring the actual world closer to that mental image that we have. Okay. So to break it down even maybe more simply, ooh, I think we should have different shrubs around the front of the house. I think it would make the house look prettier. Environmental change, I imagine. Well, in order for that to be true, certain things have to be executed in the world. Let me plan those things. What's the difference between what my mental image is and what the actual perceived image, the perceived situation? Well, the bushes are too close together and too small. Okay. So now we then move into a planning kind of a phase where we go, well, given my knowledge of the situation, what would it take to begin to bring these two things closer together? Now, what we're going to do is we're actually going to bring in a set, we're going to load up a program, if you will. And it's probably multifaceted. It has something to do with project management. It has something to do with our design sense and the feeling that we have aesthetic pleasantness in the image. Maybe we know something about yard work and shrubs generally, and we're going to load that up. We're going to go, well, hang on, let me start thinking like somebody who understands plants. So when I say the shrubs are too small and too close together, what do I envision? Well, what are some example kinds of shrubs I could put in? So we're using our horticulturist brain, right? We're bringing this program in and we're kind of sorting through and going, oh, well, maybe, and I'm not this kind of person, but maybe a spruce at each corner of the house would be tall and stately and would open the space up a little bit. So spruce. Well, how does one plant a spruce? Is it something that I'm capable of doing, or is it something that somebody else needs to do? Have I ever done it before? Maybe I should look up a YouTube video about how to plant a spruce. Okay. Well, that's just the corners. Okay. So let's think some more about this. So you see how it's our executive function that's bringing these things together, and how our executive function is loading up different sets of thought techniques and different programs, if you will, to help us do it. You know, we load up our time sense and we go, well, since it's plants, where I live has very mild winters. So I live in Alabama, very mild winters. So perhaps I could engage in a shrubbery project 12 months out of the year if I chose to. In some parts of the world, that can't happen. Some parts of the world, you can't plant shrubs in the winter, or it's very inconvenient to do so. And so we begin to bring that in and we say, okay, well, how am I going to organize in time sequence these sets of events? And so what's happening, the resource we're consuming in order to do all of this is our attention. If you're trying to think, what was the name of that tall, stately shrub and you get interrupted, an external claim on your attention, then you forget about the shrub. The shrub literally leaves your attention. And your attention flashlight that was pointed on this shrub shifts over to point at the person who came in and interrupted. And it's no longer pointed at the shrub. So we lose perception of the shrub, so to speak. And so the very thing that powers this executive function, attention, it's the raw material for this executive function. And that relatively brief example highlights the fact that if we're worried, if we have stress and anxiety, and we're using our attentional resource to focus on a specific problem, oh, I feel like I'm not productive enough, then that's where the flashlight is. And it's not on ways to get better. Okay. Now, the two are not totally distinct, and we alluded to this a few minutes ago. So now we're thinking about this executive function, and we say, okay, well, what have we done? How have we made progress? Well, we've broken down executive function into a candidate set of ideas, scientific management. So we talked about planning, attention management, how is my focus, problem solving, what are some tactics and ways to solve problems, information management, okay, how do I make sure that I can effectively find the things that I need, relationship building, okay. So now that we have these individual things, relationship building may be more like being a lawyer. I think it's a spectrum. So there's not really bright lines, but these core pieces, and then the basic workplace competencies, being on time, effectively communicating your ideas, right? So we can work on each one of these things. One of the core things that I help people with is information management, and that's what the toolkit is about. So if you've listened to the podcast, you've heard me say attention compass. Well, attention compass is mostly about managing information. Okay, so we can work on this. We can use the computer that we've already outsourced our information management to. There's better ways to do it with the computer. There's better ways to manage information with the computer, and there's worse ways. Okay? And the computer is changing in how it helps us manage information. So understanding that, right? And having good tactics when we go to the machine. What can it do? What can it not do for helping me manage my information? Attention management, right? And then literal time management, literally time management, like project management, okay? Which is, well, how long is that going to take? What do I need to do next? How can I have the resources at the appropriate place at the appropriate time? Okay, this planning piece, right? So these core skills are things that we can work on and get better at. Problem solving is a skill. I've recently been rereading a book called The Organized Mind. And it's my own efforts to better organize my information. The fact that I'm rereading this book, and that's a long story, I won't get into it. But The Organized Mind talks about some mental problem solving routines. Okay. Oh, here's another one that probably deserves to be in our list of executive function. Decision making. How do we decide? Are there particular skills to do that? You know, how do we, a certain level of math, right? Business level math, right, is going to be involved in this. And so when we look at those things, then we go, okay, well, now we can break these down and get good at them individually. Okay. So how do we get better at planning? Well, we look into the ideas of project management, because that is the science of planning in a large scale. How do we get better at decision making? Well, there's research into this. There's a book here that you can't see. It's called Decisive, and it's by Chip and Dan Heath. We can talk about decision making models and what do we mean by decision making and how can we get better at it. Certainly, Annie Duke's title, Thinking in Bets, is something about decision making as well. And so we can break this down and look at each of these individual components. And then as we get better at the individual components, then we get better overall. And we get better at this executive function thing, which, if my hypothesis is correct, makes us more able to bring the world into line with our mental image of the world. Make the world into what we think it should be, our part of the world. Maybe you have bigger plans than that. Maybe you think the larger world should change in some way. And how would you go about doing that? So as we're thinking about these ideas, now we're talking about executive function. And that's where the rubber meets the road with these attention components and these skills and these learning abilities that we all put on. So I'll be talking about this a good bit more as we go forward with the podcast. So let's do some recap here real quick. So what's the takeaway? Okay. Well, we're talking about productivity anxiety, and productivity anxiety highlights this urgent, in my mind, need that we have to understand and improve our executive function. Productivity anxiety to me means that we need to improve our executive function. So in order to improve it, we need to understand what it is and begin to practice scientific management principles against it. And I will lead us in an effort to do that. And the reason that this is true is because executive function is the fundamental basis for the kind of productivity that we all want to have. It's the fundamental basis of human productivity. It's this ability to, and it encompasses imagining new states of the world too. Okay. It's hard to imagine new states of the world unless you've been curious about different states of the world, right? It's hard to imagine that your living room should be a different specific color if you're only familiar with 4 colors. Okay. So bringing those things together, bringing that imagined state, okay, that goal state, if you will, into line with what the world is to some greater or lesser degree, that's productivity. And that's the kind of work that we do as humans. Now, good news is we get better at the executive function, and that is the cure for this productivity anxiety. We know we're competent at this because we've studied it and we've exercised it, and we now know that we're competent at it. So we don't worry about it anymore. Okay. I don't want to sound arrogant. I know I'm good at remembering things because of my systems. So I don't worry about it. I don't worry about forgetting things anymore. It works out. Everything's fine. I don't have anxiety over it. So we're getting better. And that's the cure for this productivity anxiety, which leads to greater human flourishing, which is what I'm all about. So we have powerful tools at our disposal, our computer, search functions, our own mental capacities, and these should support our executive function rather than interfere with them. And a lot of the ways we use our devices interferes with our executive function. So we're going to get into that as well. And the key is to use the tools well, in line with their purposes, not in line with other people's purposes for them in your life. Oh, Larry, what do you mean? That's really complicated. The people that sold you this phone want you to behave in certain ways because you own it. You want to behave in certain ways because you own it. Those two may not correspond. Fair enough? You go on Facebook because you want to keep up with your friends. Facebook lets you on because they can sell your attention. Your goals are not in line. Okay? So going back to using the tools for your intentions and using them properly and consistently and ensuring that they support you rather than undermining your executive function. So what we want to do is we want to be our own executive. Okay. It's difficult for anybody else to be responsible for your personal executive function because it's not visible to them. Most bosses expect these skills by the time you show up. And formal training in them is not common. So we need to figure it out. I'll help you. We'll think about these things. So we emphasize new mindsets, tactics, and habits of thought, of use, these kinds of ideas, learning to get better. Structures like the attention compass were designed specifically to provide this operating system for you, an operating system for your executive function, some patterns, some behaviors to engage in, okay, so you're better at this, some modes of thought, okay, some ways to investigate your own executive function. So by consciously working on your executive function, a little better at problem solving, improving your information management, improving your relationships, okay, helps your executive function and your productivity. Well, relationships, Larry, what's the story there? Well, if you're a boss, you need to have strong relationships with the people who report to you so that when you ask them to do something, they do it. Vice versa, so that they'll tell you when they need you to do something. And that makes the whole team function better. Makes you a better boss, makes your organization a stronger organization, makes everybody more money. Productivity. So this executive function is the underlying skill set that allows us to function well in the modern world. And it encompasses all of these essential, I'm going to say life skills, but you know I don't mean life as compared to work. Okay. And so by embracing this notion of executive function and trying to improve our personal operating system, we become more effective, more productive. We become more capable of turning my world and myself into what I want them to be. Again, if you want to reach out and get some help with this, I'm happy to do it. Maybe you need help from me. Maybe you need help from some of the other folks that I know that work on specific parts of this. Maybe I'll recommend a book for you. But love to have you reach out. Again, Larry at dobusywrite.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. And let's get out there. Let's look at our executive function. And if we can improve our executive function, that'll help us to do busy right. I'll leave it there for now. This is Larry Tribble, Ph.D. Thanks for taking some time to improve your task and information management on the Do Busy Right podcast. The show is dedicated to helping you think about how to get better at working. And we do this by improving your attention and your focus. I believe that your work is not just about your job, but about all the tasks that you do to turn yourself, your environment, and your relationships into what you want them to be. What we're really talking about here is the underpinnings of becoming who you want to be. The primary way I help people is through coaching the attention compass process. Attention compass is 4 workflows and a tool set that support our information, task, and attention management. I help people with big goals to build habits that put them in a position to achieve. We do this by eliminating wasted time and wasted attention. If you'd like to know more, you can find me on LinkedIn or go to dobusywrite.com for more information. Have a good week, more effective and less exhausted. Do busy right.